Some shook her head as she told Early. The officer continued smoothly, as if I'd only sneezed. We are hoping your husband turns himself in and can clear his name. Whoa, Early said again. Some held up her hand. Just wait. Here's the slammer. One of the officers then asked me about jewelry. I told him that Dash and I only had wedding bands and that they weren't expensive gold. I showed him my hand. No engagement ring? The officer asked. We couldn't afford it, I said. We've been saving all these years for a home. The officer reached in a metal box sitting on the table and pulled out something tiny and held it up to the light. It sparkled. Ever seen this before? He asked me. Is it a diamond? I asked, squinting for a better look. Yes, small but quite valuable. A stone probably cut for an engagement ring, but this is no ordinary stone. Using a laser to identify it, a jeweler in Chicago tells us this is a gemstone from the biggest diamond heist in history. The theft happened almost 8 years ago in the European city of Antwerp in Belgium. Only one of the other thousands of stones taken that day has been recovered. This is the giant news. So he was just trying to impress you or something? Early asked. Some pause. That's what I was wondering too. And then Juby blurted, I love Belgian waffles. Yeah, cream and syrup, sticky wicky fingers. And suddenly I didn't know if I was laughing or crying. The detective glared at me and said, You won't be smiling when you hear the next part. Sticky is right. This stone was found on the floor in your apartment when the police went through the mess again. One of the officers picked it up next to the broken coffee table. Some paused and blew her nose. I asked them right away if someone could have gotten in there and dropped the diamond to make Dash look bad. They ignored me, and of course, finding the stolen gemstone is what sealed the arrest warrant and made the whole darn book business look so bad. This is all just 1000% insane. Early was stunned. Dash would never steal for us, would he? She whispered. Of course not, baby. Never. Early could only nod, the dreadfulness of this whole day catching up to her. Sun was still talking, her voice now shaking. I realized something awful in the room today, that when you're this poor and without money or an address, hardly anyone thinks you're worth listening to or helping. Just the words living in a shelter make you someone the police aren't too worried about, less than your average citizen when it comes to rights. And now that Dash is missing, the fact that he's been a man with a job, a family, and a home doesn't seem to count. Seeing how excited the detectives were about that dumb diamond today, I knew they cared more about that stone than the man or us. Dang, Early said, swallowing hard. That's scary. Her voice wobbled. Dash is going to be okay, right, Some? Of course, baby, Some said softly. Then she shook her head and sat up straighter, as if to pull them all together. Juby, now awake, said, Pow, pow, let's get those guys. Oh, Lord, don't talk like that, Some said. Seriously, son, you're hearing an awful lot these days, and you need to stay quiet and polite in all of this. No gun talk. Don't want to make extra trouble for Dash. Some reached for her children's hands, so the three made a circle. She went on. And before Juby and I left today, one of the policemen told me that I shouldn't talk to anyone about the diamond. Not yet. So you two, you know what that means. Zip the lip. Okay, Early said slowly. But why did they talk about it in front of Juby then? He's four, Some said. Zip the lip, Juby promised, nodding so hard and fast his teeth rattled. Ow, he added, popping a finger in his mouth. Understand, son? Not a word about what we heard today. I'll be good, Juby nodded. Hey, Early said. I was saving this for later, but I did think of one person who might help us some. Remember Dash talking about Mr. Wave? Well, he's got a cell phone number. I asked the lady in the office at school today to look him up in Chicago Public Schools directory. She's getting in touch to let him know I'm Dash's daughter and to ask if I can call. Some reached over and pulled Early's head against her body. Well, who knows? You never give up, do you? She said, and hugged her daughter so long and hard that the zipper of her sweatshirt made a little print on Early's cheek. That evening, the three pearls ate without talking, even Juby. After dinner, as happened every Thursday evening, the shelter showed a movie against one wall in the main room. Anyone who wanted to watch could sit at the tables in the eating area. It was Peter Pan, an old version. The audience was quiet, happy to watch Tinker Bell, The Flying Lesson, and later on, The Pirates. The story of Peter, the spunky boy without a home, the Lost Boys. It seemed like everyone in the shelter had come downstairs. And that night, after the three pearls had gone to sleep and a rising moon slipped rosy light between broken slats in the shelter blinds, Early had a bizarre dream. Crimp. Psst, Early, wake up. Dash is leaning over her in the bunk, his finger to his lips. She startles awake and reaches to hug him, a sob rising in her throat, but he steps back. Smiling, he says, I'm setting you and Sam and Juby free, out of reach. But how, Dash? Oh, I'm so glad you're home. That's the problem. I can't come home. Not yet. We don't have one. Gotta figure that out. Have to research rhythms. Oh, but you know we will, Dash. You know one day we'll head home, like you always promised. You know we will. You can do it. You got everything you need. He takes another step back. Why can't you stay here with us, Dash? Please, you can't leave us again. As Dash melts into shadow, his fingers to his lips, Early realizes the four of them are suddenly outside the shelter and standing in the street. She isn't cold, turning her head with an effort, as if against pressure. She sees that Juby and Sum aren't really awake. They don't know where they are and can't see Dash. Dash is speaking. I'm going to show you how to fly. Raise your arms and you'll feel the strength come from a bright circle right in the center of your body. I'll see you at HOME. Just say the O in the middle and up you go. Oh, oh. Suddenly the three are up in the air, arms out in front, and Early can feel the lift, the hope, and the win. Somehow she knows that Sam and Juby are with her and that she's doing what Dash wants her to do. The city below twinkles, hums, and grinds. Here a car is honking. There an ambulance speeds through a red light. As they fly, Early can see lights inside a few windows, a yellow curtain, a patch of stained glass, pigeons asleep on sills, people shuffling against a sidewalk. Heads are tucked against the cold. One figure pulls a cart. No place to go? Still moving though, whispers an unfamiliar voice. Orly wonders if she is overhearing strangers' thoughts. She knows they're heading home, as Dad said, and that the home they will land at will oddly have a brick red roof and a broken chimney. An ember of worry glows inside her as she flies, worry that Dash won't make it. The moon shines huge and bright. Dash had told her what to do, but what did research rhythms mean? Research rhythms. Research rhythms. Early jolted awake, feeling Sam's hand on her shoulder. Did you see Dash? Early asked. We were flying. Early, baby, you were having a bad dream. Some was up on one elbow, her voice groggy. No, no, a good one, and I know what to do, Early whispered. Some said nothing, but rubbed her daughter's back until her breathing leveled into sleep. Crimp. The moment Early's eyes opened in the morning, she wrote down her dream. First, she underlined research rhythms in black, counting the 15 letters. 1 plus 5 equals 6, but then what? As she washed her face, she ran the two words through her head, noticing the re-rise sounds. She brushed her teeth, the syllables foaming along, and wondered if Dash also had sounds run through his head and a steady beat, an invisible rhythm that kept time with everyday life. She was pretty sure he did. Mrs. Happity walked them to school again, but without Aisha, who had a bad cold. Early missed walking next to her new friend. They might have talked about last night's amazing dream. Instead, Early said good morning to each of the people she passed on the street who were asking for money. She looked up at the cool oyster shell sky and smiled. She knew now what it felt like to fly. It was like you could be friends with the wind, which whistled in a silvery current along the side of your body. You could steer simply by rolling one way or the other. She wondered if her dream was only from seeing Peter Pan. But no, Dash had visited them last night. He had shown her how to leave the shelter with Julie and Sam, and how to head home, wherever that might be. He had spoken to her, and she knew that wasn't imagined. It felt as real as the buildings and people around her now. She walked into fifth grade that morning with her back straight, feeling almost like her old self. The class was huge and noisy. The teacher, Mrs. Chaff, a nervous young woman, a nervous young woman with a buzz cut and a little kid voice, had barely noticed she had a new student this week. Early didn't mind. Less attention was a relief. Mrs. Schaff's teaching seemed mostly about handing out worksheets, seeing the work done quietly, and collecting the results. So far, they studied a list of spelling words that all began with dis. Dissatisfied, dismay, dismiss, dismantle, which caught Early's attention, as no other teacher had ever selected words that way for a spelling lesson. Next came a map of the United States. Each state had to be labeled and spelled correctly. Early got Rhode Island, Arkansas, Massachusetts, and Tennessee wrong. At lunchtime, she made herself a sandwich, took it over to the counter where you picked up forks and napkins, and slipped it into her backpack. Then she hurried to the office. Mrs. B's in a meeting? Early's face fell. Did she leave any messages for Early Pearl or a phone number? The person at the desk shook his head. Early sat down in the hallway and ate her lunch. She drank from the water fountain and went into the library. Pulling out one of the fresh homemade notebooks, she printed word book on the cover. First, she looked up research, which had a French root. The work of a spy. Early smiled as she planted the word. Next came rhythm, from Latin and Greek roots. Any kind of movement with reoccurring strong and weak parts, an on-off beat, as if sound and silence are a harmonious pattern. Langston would add that rhythm could be found flowing from a pencil tucked within a flower, or humming outward from almost any engine. Could a gemstone have a rhythm? Something was missing on what she understood. Early could feel it. She glanced up to see a gray haired figure with baggy clothes, wrinkled skin, and huge red ears. Walking with a stiff leg limp, he passed the library door. The man at the front desk spoke with him. Then there was an announcement over the school loudspeaker. Will Early Pearl please come to the office? Her heart pounding, afraid to believe this might be who she wanted it to be. Early put away her word book and stood as straight as she could. Help me, Dash, she said softly. The man took two awkward steps toward Early and shook her hand. His was bony and pale, still cool from being outside, and she knew hers was sweaty. Well, hello, Early Pearl, he said, his voice a raspy whisper. Early forced herself to look up. The man was smiling and frowning at the same time. Something Early came to learn was a tactic. You couldn't help but focus on someone who seemed both mad and glad. Hello, hello, he growled, following that with a long, painful cough. Pardon, he gasped. Smoker's lungs. That's okay, Early smiled and blinked. Thanks, Mr. Wave. Thanks for finding me. Mind if we talk someplace? Mr. Wave asked the man behind the desk. I was her father's teacher, and her father was once a superlative student. I got a call from a Mrs. B who works in your office, and I want to hear the news. Superlative, Early thought? As in Superman? Sure, no problem. How about in that meeting room there? It has a glass wall and a door that closed. Perfect, Mr. Wave and Early said in one voice, and this time Early got a relaxed smile from the older man, a smile that divided his face into parentheses of stubbly skin. His teeth, Early noticed, were a brownish yellow. They sat, Early told. Mr. Wave crossed his arms on his chest and looked down while she talked, as if she knew that was easier for her than having a strange grown up look directly at her. Early filled them in on their family and all that had happened since a terrible day in January, minus the diamond news. She ended with the warrant out for Dasher's arrest. There was a moment of silence. Early looked at her lap and then back at Mr. Wave. Was he going to get up and leave? He uncrossed his arms and rubbed his eyes roughly with both palms, so hard that the skin took a moment to settle back in place. Pressing his hands flat on the table, he looked directly at Early. You are Dashiell's daughter. That's clear. Early nodded. He said that to me a lot as she looked back at Mr. Wave. She noticed with the eye flash of fright that he had a dark mole on one eyelid, just as the man with the mask had. The man who had lifted her up and said scary things. That is a silly coincidence, she said to herself.